the internet, the connectivity that we have, into something that is not as beautiful as we want it to be. We also have little things, little frustrations that happen, even with the tools that are good, where it doesn't quite match the experience or the way that I think. Maybe it's completely ignoring my approach to things. And worse, we do accidental harm. Um, Often your circumstances are ignored, you're not welcomed, maybe you're called hard to reach. And these are things that are harmful to people. So it's these two that I'm really interested in taking a look at. But before we go in there, I want to give an example. So the example is about the misinformation, the disinformation, even the frustrations and the harms are dangerous. They're dangerous to us as a community, to us as a civilization, for the way that we sort of pull our lives together and interact with each other and interact with the services around us. So because this is going to come up again and again, it is not something that we can vanquish and it'll stay dead. It will grow again and again because we've heard these stories from our great grandparents. So we've got to learn how to overcome it. So here's the example that I want to run through. This is Joy Buolamwini. She has overcome it. She will have to do it again. But back when she was a student at the MIT Media Lab, she was working on her paper about facial recognition software. It wouldn't recognize her face, dark pigmentation. It wouldn't recognize her face because of a female aspect to it. All of the training that went into facial recognition was apparently done on photos of pale males. And unfortunately, all of the CCTV in various cities, they're starting to add facial recognition software to it, so that they can tell who it is who's walking around and maybe, find the perpetrator. That's always the thing. We got to find the perpetrator. Whereas, 95%, 99% of the people walking by are not perpetrators. This is Aaron, and he also was not a perpetrator, and he was arrested on his front lawn. I think it was in June, when he had his face, somehow the facial recognition software within a store, looking at somebody who had stolen a little thing from the shelf, matched up his face. And so the police marched onto his lawn, arrested him in front of his wife and kids, in front of all of his neighbors, walked him off, made him spend the night in jail, and then figured out when they looked for themselves that this was not the guy in the image. The facial recognition software failed entirely. And so this little bit here, I've just got the place where they say we apologize, but there's no way an apology is going to make up for spending a night in jail, or this whole evidence to all the neighbors, to his family, that just starts pulling things in the wrong direction for him. So what has happened is facial recognition has been taken away from the CCTVs in San Francisco, in Boston, Seattle. I'm not sure about some international cities, but they're starting to do away with it because it's not working. And this is because of Joy Buolamwini. She put out another paper in January. She appeared at the Boston City Council meetings around this so that she could give evidence. And she actually appeared on the cover of Fast Company magazine in August. So yes, we can do this. We can have hope. We can have empathy. We can make a difference. You all, especially in the roles that you play, can make a difference. Does not need to be your boss. So if our goal and our organization's goal is to make better solutions and have better ideas, we have to overcome the misinformation, the disinformation, the little frustrations, and the actual harm. So how do we do this? We go deeper. We figure out what the assumptions are that we're working with, which are hard to recognize sometimes because the definition of assumption is something you don't realize you're doing. But we can be more intentional about it. We can look for more perspectives and more opportunities intentionally. And there are ways to do this. How do you go deeper in your org? The main ingredient is that you make time. That is the main ingredient in that answer. So let's go through some of the other things as well. These are my P's: the person, the purpose, and the problem space. I want to go through that first, and then I've got some other areas that I want to cover. So person, purpose, problem space. This is the diagram you may have seen before, for those of you who haven't. And this also came along with your slide deck so that you can post it on the wall if you want. In the solution space on the right-hand side, there are some cycles, and those cycles represent something called continuous dual track methodology, or the process you use to develop your solutions. You could put any methodology in there, whatever your organization follows in the solution space. It's agile, maybe lean, whatever it is, you stick it there in the solution space. And this is where you would have those little areas of research where you're doing maybe you're co-designing with people, coming up with new ideas. Maybe you're doing field work and observing people. Maybe you're actually coming up with ideas and testing those first. And this is what all goes into something called the product backlog, with a validated user story and a prototype. That's how this particular cycle works. I don't know that much about product backlogs because I've never personally worked with them. I'm always all the way over there on the left in the problem space. So the solution space, the other thing I want to call your attention to is way at the top and way at the bottom. Way at the top, I say the solution space has to do with a user, someone who has a relationship or a potential relationship to your org. They're looking at you. You might not call them users. You might call them civilians. You might call them passengers if you were an airline. Whatever noun you use, it's somebody with a relationship to you. And all the stuff that's done in the solution space is usually hurried, which is why I think time is an important ingredient. In the middle, we've got that stripe that's called strategy. That's what's kind of driving us. And in strategy, according to the continuous dual track method, there's something called the opportunity backlog, or maybe you use jobs to be done. And that is what contains all the ideas that you want to try to solve. And the problem is that most of the time, this opportunity backlog gets filled by anecdotes, by one-off stories you have where it really went awful for someone and you want to fix that. Or maybe it's some ideas that some of your leadership has. It doesn't come from research necessarily. So there is something called problem space. Problem space research is what can fill the opportunity backlog with more solid evidence of opportunities, of people that we've ignored, of harmful experiences that we can fix. So there's also a cycle in there. And in there, we're doing listening sessions. We're developing empathy with people. And I'm going to get into that. And we're finding patterns. And I'm going to get into that. And that creates some artifacts, such as a mental model diagram that we can use as an opportunity map, and some thinking style segments that we can use to create different solutions for different approaches, no longer mismatched. People actually use your service and feel heard. Oh, they recognize me. The thing at the top, I only refer to the people that we're studying as people or humans. They are not users at this point. They have no relationship to your org at the point that we study them in the problem space. I'll get into this too. And in this respect, this is the kind of research you do once a year, maybe once every 6 months, maybe once every 2 years, something like that. It's not the spinning cycles that happen in the solution space. Okay, so what is a purpose? A purpose is the way that I frame all my studies, whether or not those studies are in the solution space or in the problem space. A purpose is something that someone wants to accomplish or wants to make progress on. It's maybe their thinking or planning. I mean, a purpose could even be decide whether to X. I don't use the word goal simply because the word goal tends to have a lot of baggage in development cycles and methodology. So I try to stay away from that. A purpose is something someone's trying to get done. And you can have purposes in both the problem space and the solution space. So here's some examples kind of overlaid on that same diagram. Let's look at the second one at the bottom, the vacation lodging. I bounce back and forth between these, and you've got the slides. You can look at the first one. The second one is vacation lodging. And let's look in the solution space. So over on the right, down at the bottom, it says, hey, if I am trying to find some vacation lodging, there are some purposes I have in mind. I need to find out if the place is available, the dates that I'm going to be there. I want to make sure it's maybe not, something that I don't like, noisy or smelly or something. I want to make sure that they do allow maybe kids and dogs. Make sure that I'll be able to get my wheelchair in. Make sure that I'll be able to cook or host an extended family gathering and see how close it is to the activities that we want to do on vacation. So there's all sorts of purposes that you can explore, but you don't want to only explore those purposes because you're bounding it by your solution. Over in the problem space, vacation lodging, that's box at the bottom on the left, some of your purposes might be, oh, hey, I wonder if I could live like a local there for a few weeks, or I want to find out about the different neighborhoods and learn more about where I want to stay. I want to decide how long maybe it makes sense to stay there. Maybe I'm doing something where my family comes from here and I want to do some sort of historic connecting of places, figure out where my family came from, all sorts of different purposes. This list could go on and on and on. And because it can go on and on and on, this means we can explore little by little different purposes that we haven't served yet. Different purposes, larger purposes that might bring more opportunity and much broader perspective to our teams. So purposes in the problem space, you can recognize that it's in the problem space because there's multiple ways that I, as a person, can achieve that purpose. I might go chat with my neighbor. Let's say my purpose is to go on vacation. I need somebody to take care of my cat while I'm away. So I'm going to go chat with my neighbor. I'm going to make sure that I've got enough food stocked in the pantry for the cat. I'm going to write instructions. So this is all around the purpose of making sure that my cat is taken care of. And while maybe that's not something that you want to serve yourself as your org, that's something that people are aware of, and that's something you can help them achieve by linking up with somebody who can help. Maybe there are pets, pet sitting services. I don't know. Or maybe it's fine that they just go to the neighbor. Maybe they've got this little exchange that they do. Cat sitting each other's cats while they're away. Purposes in the solution space often are only achieved using your own solution. Sometimes people will do some research with purposes in the solution space achieved using another person's solution. You might call that competitive analysis or market scanning to make sure that if you were in commercial, you knew what your competitors were up to. But here's a way of looking at it where we've got the problem space with the person doing their purpose in the center. They are not thinking about your tool in specific, but their purpose. They're thinking about it. They're having emotional reactions about how they figure this out or push it forward. They're making decisions based on their guiding principles. And they have all these tools around them available. One of them, that brain at the top, I'm like, oh, just even their memory could help them. Or maybe they have to go look something up in a book or watch a YouTube video about it. Or maybe just go chat with the neighbor. Hey, can you take care of my cat? Your solution is one of many that they can reach toward. And it includes manual tools and social tools. It includes all the mental things that we do, in addition to our digital tools that we are focused on right now because of the age that we're in. So that's the important thing to recognize, is that your solution is one of many that someone uses to achieve their purpose. Okay. A lot of those other solutions have organizations behind them. Not all of them. Like your neighbor doesn't have an organization behind it. Your memory doesn't have an organization behind it. But this is the true field of other organizations that are helping to support that person. And you might be able to join up with them in certain areas that you can't support yourself. However, until now, our field has really treated that person in the middle as a user, or whatever other noun you use to refer to them. And we're not really interested in their purpose so much as only looking at the way that they have purposes connected with our solution. So down here at the bottom, we've got our exploration of how people are using our services, or how we might find new ideas for them to use our services. Okay, it's all very solution space oriented. And so much so that we actually replace the person in the center with somebody called a user. I don't want to erase that person. It's very important that that person, and this is true for all of us, we have hope, we have empathy. We want to help a person, not a user. So one of the things that's interesting is that a person's purpose might shift over time or very quickly. It might get smaller, it might get larger. There are different related purposes as well that you can study. So when I say that you do these kinds of studies maybe once a year, this is because it's vast. You can't study it all in one study, and you don't want to because you'll just burn yourself out. What you want to do is think of it like you're sketching a way forward. If you're taking a walk through a forest, and you're just sketching as you're going, and you're seeing the different paths going off, and you're noticing the different things in the environment, and you're like, oh, that's really important. I think this could make a huge difference. So you go in that direction, and then you come back to the path and go in another direction, or maybe you stay in another direction. You don't stay on the path because the path wasn't taking you where you needed to go. So that's what we're trying to get done. The other thing is that people have different thinking styles. They have different philosophic approaches to their purpose. And right now, quite typically, especially in the commercial space, we are creating a one-size-fits-all solution, which means it doesn't fit anybody really well. It's created for something called the mythical average user, and there is no such thing as average. 99% Invisible, the podcast out of Oakland, has a really great episode on the myth of average that I highly recommend if you haven't heard it already. It's from a couple of years ago. And what you want is to make sure that instead of just creating that average solution, you can create more tailored solutions for different people's approaches. The key here is the matching and the making people feel heard and feel supported. Most of the time, those frustrations and the harm comes from places where we don't know anything about different people's thinking styles. Okay, so if we go back to that diagram, the problem space in the middle with the person trying to accomplish their purpose of the moment, which may shift, using their thinking style, which may also shift based on context, and all of our solutions are digital solutions. Let's say, yeah, we need to explore both. We need to explore the purposes that are related to our solutions, but we need to add more exploration of purposes in the problem space. This is where we're going to very purposefully examine our assumptions, examine our blind spots, figure out who we've been ignoring or situations we've been ignoring, looking at situations and people that we haven't been ignoring, and actually getting to depth and truly understanding what's going through their minds, as opposed to just seeing what they're doing and how they're interacting. So problem spaces are vast. How, there's no forest here. This is the desert in Utah. Sorry. How are you going to map your way through? How are you going to go down one path and observe and see different areas of depth that you want to get into and turn onto different paths? You do it little by little. This is not something you will ever accomplish and finish in your own careers. It is something that is ongoing as we explore more, so that we can give this information to new team members that come on board. Even rest assured that when we retire, this information is out there for the team that have taken over for us, and they can keep doing the good work. So here's another really good diagram to show stakeholders that don't see everything. And this I've heard people use to say, hey, there are a bunch of data collection techniques out there, and we're only using 2 of them. And both of those are in evaluative, let's say. And so there's some more work we can be doing. Let me explain how this is laid out. All those little boxes are different data collection techniques. And the boxes sort of cover over different sections of the grid behind them. The grid is broken up into 6 different parts, where vertically we've got the solution space and the problem space. In the solution space, we have generative research, we have evaluative research. And a lot of these data collection techniques can be used in either generative or evaluative. And in the problem space, we have we don't know what we're calling it yet. We have opportunity research, or sometimes people call it foundation research or exploratory research. We're trying to come up with which word we want to use. And then horizontally, I have it divided into qualitative versus quantitative. So quantitative is collecting data based on what people are doing and how they're typically using our organization's solution. There are ways to go out into the problem space there too. And so if we look at this and we show our managers, hey, we're only using 2 of these and they're both in the evaluative space, that helps. That helps helps them understand. I've also put some ovals on here. These are kind of generally how we call usability research, and sort of kind of what we call user UX research or big data. Problem space and futures research is what I'm calling what is happening in the problem space. We'll land on a name, but futures research is actually the name that's used in ethics. And ethics has a very prescriptive way of stopping, of taking time, of checking in on our assumptions, on our externalities, on the people that we've done something that was not the consequence that we really intended. And that's what they call it. So we will see what we end up calling it. So that's person, purpose, and problem space. I want to talk about number 2, which is where the patterns come in. And that is working to remove bias and assumptions. There's no way any of us can be unbiased. That would be like living without breathing. It happens. It's the way our brains work, but it's good to be aware of it and to constantly check ourselves, especially when we're trying to come up with better solutions for people. So this is where I want to talk about empathy. When we use that word empathy, it actually means different things to different people. And so we may, within our organization, want to sort of check, like, which empathy are we talking about? In psychology or therapy, there are actually 8 different kinds of empathy. they are referred to by two-word names, not just the shortcut empathy. So cognitive empathy is one of them. That's understanding someone's inner thinking and emotional reactions and guiding principles, like understanding what's going on in their head, that little voice that's going uh, through them as they're trying to make decisions and workarounds and things. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of empathy, which are all valid. Empathic listening is a especially good one to use with your peers, with your stakeholders. And doing listening sessions with stakeholders is a brilliant thing, especially doing them repeated over time. But let's take a look at cognitive empathy. So that's consciously cultivating an understanding of that person's inner voice as they're trying to accomplish their purpose. If we don't frame it by a purpose, then patterns are not going to show up between the people that we are researching. But first, let's talk about surface versus depth. So, in a typical conversation, even in a typical interview that you do for research, people will tend to give explanations. They will explain how they're doing things or why it is done that way. They'll tell you their preferences and opinions. They'll scene set, give you context. They'll give you statements of fact and sort of, generalize about things. And when I look at people's research transcripts of an interview, most of the stuff is in the surface area. What I'm looking for so that we can actually generate cognitive empathy is inner thinking, that voice, emotional reactions that set off more emotional reactions or set off more inner thinking, and guiding principles so that people can make decisions. I want to know those things at depth so that I can form cognitive empathy. We can't form cognitive empathy at the surface. This is key. This might be a good slide for your stakeholders as well. But as researchers, we're just collecting mountains of data at the surface that, yeah, they could help in usability research to tweak some services that we have, but they're not going to give us cognitive empathy with people. Okay. In a listening session, if you're trying to get to depth, what you do is you don't come at it with a list of questions. You come at it with a germinal question and you let them take you through their process, through their mind, not in general, but very specific to that purpose, the last time they did it, the last couple of times they did it. And as they start unfolding it and scene set and give you explanations why and how, you're going to see little indications that there's probably some emotion behind that or probably some inner thinking behind that. And you'll start to ask about that part that they brought up. So, what went through your mind then? Okay, that's how you get to depth. So a transcript that I get back from a listening session has between 40 and 120 concepts at depth. Those concepts might be of the type inner thinking, the type emotional reaction, or the type guiding principle, but there's between 40 and 120 of them. When I look at other people's user interviews, there's 10 concepts at depth. I saw 16 in one of them. So this is the difference in the richness of the data. Depth is super, super important to forming cognitive empathy and to giving us the data that we need to be able to see those details in the forest and see the opportunities. Okay, so yeah, no list of questions. That scares people. It's actually quite amazing to do a listening session, starting with the germinal question. I recruit differently too, and I do spoken screeners with folks. So I've already talked to them and said, hey, this is going to be the purpose that we're talking about. I want to make sure that that person's done enough thinking about that purpose so that we can have a conversation about their thinking. If they haven't, they will not become a participant in my research because there's nothing there. Okay. So We already have talked to them. We get back together with them later and say, hey, okay, this is our listening session now. Here's the terminal question. What went through your mind the last time that you blah, blah, blah? And I know, and he knows that we've got stuff to talk about. And then we just pay rapt attention. We make sure that we're building trust so the other person doesn't feel judged and is willing to open up and be vulnerable about their inner thinking and emotional reactions and guiding principles. And then you're noticing those little places where you could maybe go to depth. Hey, what went through your mind there? Or just a micro reflection, like, a little bit scary. Something, the words that that person was saying. I teach how to do this in my listening deeply course. And it's really amazing. It's so rich. And the other thing is that I do it, and it's perfect for the pandemic, only by audio. There are a lot of reasons that I do that, which I can't get into today because we don't have a lot of time, but I do it only by audio, which means we can be gathering rich, deep data now. We don't have to stop researching. Listening, helping a person feel heard is an amazing experience. And at the end of these calls, the person who has been the speaker often will thank me as the listener for the time, because this was an amazing opportunity to explore some of their inner thinking, clarify some of their emotional reactions, and help them sort of get a leg up on what was going through their mind. Okay, listening deeply, I have this analogy. It's like wearing a really heavy hat. And so your neck muscles are going to get tired quickly. I don't have the listening deeply hat on most of the time. This is not a state of nirvana that you work toward and you are always listening deeply. This is hard. It's heavy. You put it on, you have to practice, build up those muscles in your neck. Practice, take it off. Practice, take it off. Practice for a couple of minutes a day. When you see a situation where you can figure out what the purpose is and ask somebody what went through their mind. Okay. I've built up my muscles so that I can do a listening session for 2 hours, but I can't go longer than that. I do one listening session a day when I'm doing research, mainly because we go to such depth that it's hard to untangle one person from another if you're doing 2 in a day. This is what teams are for. Remember one ingredient: time. Time is so important to give yourself a chance to develop cognitive empathy and reflect. Okay, what do we do with all those mountains of data? This is where we are looking for patterns. But we don't go looking for patterns right off. That is a place where we introduce or curate our own perspective by accident, our own unconscious bias by accident. Okay, so the first step is actually very much like empathy. It's very much like trying to develop cognitive empathy and do a listening deeply session. It is keeping that hat on so you can go through the transcript and find those concepts, find where somebody has been telling you their inner thinking or their guiding principle or their emotional reaction. See where they're repeated the same concept and collect them together into one little bunch. See where they're repeated, collect them together, untangle them. Oftentimes we talk about 2 or 3 things at once, and so we have to untangle them. And that is important because it makes the pattern finding much clearer. What we're doing is we're creating little summaries of each of those concepts. And I said there's between 40 and 120 in one transcript. We create 40 to 120 summaries of each of those concepts using a verb instead of a noun, so that when we go ahead and cultivate patterns later, we don't fall into our habit of curating based on things, not on nouns. Instead, we're really just looking at what that person said. So we're giving the chance for the data to tell us its story. And we're looking at one summary from one person and looking at all the summaries from all the other people. And we're saying, hey, did anybody else have the same focus of mental attention? And that's the affinity that we use to put these together. We're building from the bottom up, which is very important to allowing the data to say what it has to say and not putting any of our own perspective in it. Okay. Here's some examples of what summaries look like. You can see the verb, feel, the emotion, alarm. This is an emotional reaction, the first thing. By the pickup that whizzed by me. That's the reason I'm feeling alarmed. That's the key point, right? There's some supporting details in green after it, but the key point is I feel alarmed by the pickup that whizzed by me. I keep context in these things. It's important because it's a person. We don't want to leave the context behind. Second one, realize how close he came to hitting me. That's what I'm realizing. There's some supporting detail in there that I keep because the context is important. I want to know what the focus of mental attention is. And what we do is we group from the bottom up, one summary with another summary with another summary. Eventually, some groups start forming into what I call towers. And those towers start also forming into little blocks or neighborhoods. And that's how I'm describing what a mental model diagram looks like. What we're doing when we're gathering those together is just building this city skyline, where those little windows in the towers are actually the summary. So you can see what the person is saying. You can see the person there. And the towers are gathered together in little blocks of the city skyline. There's neighborhoods, maybe. Sometimes we only gather within one neighborhood, so the diagram only shows one neighborhood. But what we've got is a really connected, well-researched, deep set of data. Each one of these windows represents an example of inner thinking, an example of an emotional reaction, or an example of a guiding principle. You can also see that we have added some colors to these windows because we've also gone back through the same data in a slightly orthogonal way and figured out what the thinking styles are. I teach a course on that. I'm going to write a book on it as soon as I get time. But the thinking styles are philosophic approaches a person brings to their purpose, to their context, to the purpose that they're trying to achieve within that context. A thinking style, a person might have a thinking style and change it based on context. The example I like to give is an airline passenger. You might start your trip as really unfazed. You've got stuff to keep the kids entertained. You've got stuff to feed them. Everything's prepared. If anything goes wrong, I'm ready for it. But things go wrong, and then they go wrong again, and then they go wrong again, and you turn into a different thinking style, the frustrated thinking style. Like, is this airline ever going to get me there? So this is contextual. They're not like horoscopes, which is how I often see personas used. Personas, when they're done correctly, according to the Cooper and Goodwin approach, they're very powerful. They're the exact same thing as thinking styles, but normally people don't do them correctly based on data. So that's why I'm calling them thinking styles, just to differentiate them from the baggage that made up, invented personas have. And it comes from data with depth. What's depth? Inner thinking, emotional reactions, and guiding principles. Those three things we need that make up cognitive empathy. Okay, so thinking styles, you can also call them archetypes. If it's better or easier within your org to call them personas, go for it. I don't care what you call them. Just know that they are different. They do not have any demographics associated with them because demographics cause us unconscious bias when we use them. Okay, they are deeply researched. They are characters who play roles in different scenarios with different contexts. And the scenarios are what's important. Often I'll see people write scenarios. They've already created a bunch of personas, but the personas never feature in the scenarios. What I want is us to see different thinking styles approaching the same purpose differently in our scenarios, so that we can begin to think about and and start to roll out more bespoke, nuanced, differentiated experiences. Okay, there's an asterisk there on demographics free. There, ordinarily, a demographic does not cause thinking for a purpose unless what's happening is some discrimination, or unless there is some physiology involved. Certainly, if you've got one of those situations where your physiology doesn't match the solution, or where the solution or something around the solution is causing discrimination, you've built up a bunch of guiding principles how to handle it. You've going to still experience that emotion around it. You're still going to have inner thinking. And so when those things at depth happen because of these situations, that's when I will include them in thinking style. Okay, so here's some example thinking styles. This is within the problems, the solution space. Decide to get a new phone. This was an initial study that we did, and there were 3 different thinking styles that came out of it. One, I'm not going to read them all out loud. One was called Express Myself. The other was called Reliable Tool. And the other was Learn from Others. These are philosophic approaches people bring to the task of deciding to get a new phone. Often people would decide to get a new phone because it broke, but sometimes it was because the kid was ready for a phone, and I'm going to give the kid my phone. So the idea, though, is that there's no demographics in here. There's just a few sentences, and each of those sentences are written in the same format as the summaries that I write. So it's a conglomeration of people's sort of, in general, similar guiding principles or philosophic approach. We've got inner thinking, we've got some emotion, we've got some guiding principles in these descriptions. Here's another set. This is in the problem space. We were exploring how people do personal identity change so that we could open up our horizons for a gaming company who was creating games for young women. And we wanted to understand, they wanted to build confidence, self-confidence. So we wanted to understand what's it look like when somebody has self-confidence achieving something. So we did personal identity change. And we had in this initial study 3 as well. It isn't always 3. Spiral up in the thermal was one, escape and explore was another, and chart my own path was a third. And so now that company can actually create a game according to one of these, right? And help people select their own approach, help people recognize, and this is where I would like the machine learning to come in, is that as you are engaging with an experience, with a solution that an organization has put out, why can't we recognize what thinking style someone is in? So when we do that, we're able to then say, oh, hey, your behavior with this interaction, I'm going to tell you, I think you're going to like this solution better. I'm going to guide you over to this solution, or I'm going to guide you over to this solution based on your behavior now. And sort of like be upfront about it, and be upfront about it too when a person doesn't match any of the thinking styles. Their behavior is confusing or new, and say, hey, wow, we have to give you this generic experience because we don't understand you, and could we talk to you? Interesting, right? This is where machine learning can truly help us. Okay, so the next section is about sketching the paths ahead. This is where we're going to look at the opportunity map. So that top part, that's the mental model diagram, that city skyline. What we do with it is so powerful. We map underneath it our solutions for our org. We might map some other org solutions as well. And then what we do is we look and see, well, gosh, there are a lot of towers out there that we're not supporting at all. Are those towers that we want to support? Or, gosh, we have a lot of support under here, but all of it is weak. It's not intended for what was going on in this tower, what people were talking about, or it's only intended for one of those thinking styles, not the other thinking styles, or worse, it's not intended for any of the thinking styles. That's the place where I focus organizations on first. Look, we've got some crappy solution out there that is making people feel frustrated or harmed. We need to fix it. We need to understand what the thinking styles are and start to make it more specific, or make it even just more specific to what they're trying to get done in that slice. Okay. Oftentimes, solutions that we've created without the knowledge of that city skyline tend to be generic, and they tend to address surface level things, not things at depth. Okay. Here's another example of a mental model diagram. The top part, there's no capabilities aligned beneath, but what I'm showing here is how closely it maps to the jobs to be done approach. The jobs to be done vocabulary is in blue in the parentheticals, and my vocabulary comes right before the parentheticals in the other green color. Essentially, it's the same as what jobs to be done is. However, it goes to depth. Often jobs to be done just as a couple of subject matter expert studies, not very deep. They don't understand surface versus depth either. So the data is not solid. It isn't a very good foundation. This is a much better foundation. And then keep using your jobs to be done. This is that play between the ways that organizations do their methods, the processes that they've adopted, and the deeper data that we can create. Okay, so that's sketching the paths ahead. I want to talk a little bit more about the different approaches. So let's say that if we've got these three thinking styles, spiral up in the thermal, escape and explore and chart my own path, um, these are things that come from data that we as researchers have collected, have gone through to find the patterns, have made sure that our own biases are not affecting or influencing these things. We've gone out and validated them. We've done more research and derived thinking styles and seen that they match, or seen that they didn't, or seen that they needed tweaking. We do this every time so that we become aware of more and more, or deeper and deeper looks into each of these thinking styles. And so that first one, spiral up in the thermal, this is the idea of personal identity change where other people have done the same thing. I know it exists. I know that it can be done. Other people have done it. And I just have to keep fighting through the barriers. I have to keep myself motivated. I have to read the blogs or watch the videos of other people who have been on this path so that I can keep on it, or, give myself sticky notes. Yes, do positive feedback at the end of every day. These are the ways that I'm going to get through my self-doubt or negative comments from other people, even people that I love. And so this is me spiraling up in the thermal. So if you have a solution that's helping, this is one way, one thinking style that you can use in your tone and your approach and the actual things that you do, which is very different than the next one, which is escape and explore. For personal identity change, these people don't know what they want to change to. They just know what they've got is not comfortable. And so I have to go and explore and find where I want to go. It might be that I can encounter some tribe or whatever that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to change to this. Or perhaps one person was actually going to different countries trying to figure out, like, I want to be a kinder person. How are people kind in other countries? So if you were trying to support that, the tone would be different. The actual solutions would be different. The components of how you support these people would be different than in spiral up in the thermal. Okay. And we could use our machine learning in the beginning of an interaction with somebody to understand which which kind of philosophy they're following for this particular journey, and start to interact with them and say, oh, I think that since you know what you want to change to, I'm going to give you this experience, and have a conversation. Conversation doesn't have to be spoken, but have an interaction back and forth with that person. Don't just, I don't know, so many of our tools are mute. So many of our tools pretend not to be a thing. And if we're using machine learning, we can certainly become or personify those algorithms, not personify, but make them a thing that a person is interacting with. Okay. An intelligence, if you will. This last one's super quick. Measure the support. Don't measure engagement. I've got 5 kinds of problem space metrics that we can measure by. This is just about number 3, which is the strength of the support by thinking style. Right now, we don't have these data. We don't have these towers. And there's one company that's actually gone out and done this. It's a big multinational company where they actually set up their solution space, like usability tests or proof of concept tests based on these towers in these blocks. And when they get results, they can then map those results back onto the block. So they're just using happy face, sad face right now. All their product managers are like, oh my God, we need to turn these into happy faces. And so they've got something concrete that they can use, something tangible that they can use to measure how well they're actually supporting these towers. And they aren't really paying attention to thinking styles yet, but they could certainly do that as well, and maybe get more sophisticated than a happy face and sad face. But there is so much potential here to start to measure how well we are actually supporting someone at depth, not just at surface, not just an opinion poll, a survey, a Rickert scale. Let's understand how well we're actually supporting people's inner thinking, guiding principles, and emotional reactions as they make progress on their purpose. Okay, so that's it for me. I just want to remind ourselves that time is an important part of the way that we operate. Time and hope and empathy is what drives us. Yes, we're sometimes put into situations where there's stress about deadlines. This kind of work is ongoing. You're never going to solve it with one study. So it's an ongoing, over time type of thing. So I want to thank you so much. I want to call out on this slide all the different ways you can get a hold of me. And there's also a discount code for any book in the Rosenfeld Media Library that's up in the top. It's called Stars Rosettes 20. So thank you very much. We'll stop sharing.